Want to use sand substrate for your aquarium, but you're afraid it'll be hard to clean? Not a problem. Keep watching as I share my easy tips and tricks for keeping your sand clean and animals healthy. Hi, this is a gamer's wife here with practical and proven tips to help fish enthusiasts like you. And recently I released a video explaining the first steps to setting up a planted tank with sand substrate. Many of you asked in the comments, how in the world do you keep that sand clean? Won't it just get sucked up by the siphon if you try to vacuum it? Great question. I had the same worries when I first switched from gravel to sand because no one wants to use a substrate that's hard to clean and could trap excess waste that might harm your fish. But after I teach you a few simple techniques, you'll realize there's nothing to it and it's just like cleaning gravel. Well, almost. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be talking about using a siphon to vacuum your aquarium substrate, so if you don't know what that is or how to use one, definitely check out my water changing video in the description. Okay, first off, let's talk about sand selection. Not all sands are created equally, and if you're using a very fine, lightweight sand, it's gonna get sucked up more easily in your siphon, and you'll probably have to add more sand in your aquarium occasionally. In fact, word to the wise, you'll also want to prevent sand from getting sucked up by your hang-on back or canister filter and ruining its motor, which is exactly what happened to my first AquaClear filter. To prevent that from happening, buy a pre-filter sponge, which looks like a foam cylinder with a hole in one side, and then stick it on the end of your filter's intake tube. Added bonus, it'll grow beneficial bacteria and prevent any fish or plant leaves from getting sucked up too. Anyway, I've never had any trouble with aggressively vacuuming my substrate because I use the heavier generic brand sand sold by Petco and PetSmart. Side note, but I prefer black sand versus a lighter color because fish waste doesn't seem to show up as much. Now I know some people might say, well, why don't you get a brown colored natural looking sand to really hide that mulm? I don't know, the fish and plants just seem to really pop against a black background and substrate, so that's why I prefer it. Anyways, as I was saying before, the Petco sand has large particles that rarely get sucked up because they're too heavy to make it all the way up the tube. The only time I've had problems with this is if I'm using my mini Python siphon, which is only about 6 inches tall. It seems that the tube portion is just short enough to suck up the sand if I'm not paying attention. So how do you deal with sand if it keeps getting sucked up in the siphon? Okay, there's 3 common methods. 1, if your sand is super fine, don't stick your siphon tube into it too deeply. Instead, people will use the tube to gently swirl the water above the sand and then suck up any detritus that floats up into the water column. The great thing about this method is that you're really not disturbing your aquascape. The sand is still nice and smooth and undisturbed. However, I think Rachel O'Leary likes to use a chopstick to stir up the substrate a little bit and then hover above with her siphon to suck up whatever gets loosened. Now, if you're using a heavier sand like me and really want to get a deep cleaning, gravel vacuuming is the way to go. What do I mean by that? Just stick the tube down into the sand, like about an inch or so, suck up some waste, and then when you lift up the tube, the heavier sand particles will fall while the lighter brown detritus continues to rise. Easy peasy, just like vacuuming regular old gravel. I like to systematically go around the tank bottom in a grid-like pattern. Vacuum, raise and release. Vacuum, raise and release. And rinse and repeat until I've cleaned about half the tank. And then the next week, I'll clean the other half of the tank, or wherever looks the dirtiest. The final method is really useful for my shrimp tanks. Honestly, this should be my easiest aquarium to clean because I don't have to wipe off any algae since, it provides extra grazing areas for my sand. Unfortunately, I have a really hard time not sucking up the millions of tiny clear shrimp babies crawling everywhere. It's incredibly stressful. So this principle works for both sand particles and any live animals you don't want to suck up. Just gravel vacuum like normal, but if I see any baby shrimp in the tube, I clamp down on the hose to stop the flow and then wait for the shrimplet to eventually crawl its way out. This works for sand as well. Vacuum, 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 crimp the hose. Vacuum some more, and then crimp it to stop. It's like magic. As awesome as these techniques are, they're not perfect, and some grains may accidentally get sucked up anyways. Because of that, my husband, Mr. Gamer, really doesn't want me pouring the wastewater down our sink or toilet and accidentally clogging up our plumbing. So instead, I just dump it onto our lawn or use it to water our plants. Win-win situation. As you refill your aquarium, just realize that sand can be easily disturbed if you aim the hose right at it. So lots of people use plastic bags or colanders to lessen the water pressure and prevent their aquascaping from moving around. However, my aquariums are tall enough where I can just aim the spout at a tank wall or maybe some decor to help dissipate the flow. In fact, in my 20-gallon tank, I'm trying to maintain a gentle slope in the substrate where the sand is lower in the front of the tank and then higher in the back, kind of like stadium seating for the plants. However, gravity and my nosy coolie loaches tend to flatten the sand over time. So I usually take the opportunity during water changes to manually rebuild and reshape my little hill as needed. Boom! Clean tank, clean sand. Looks great for about 20 seconds until my fish mess it up again. Oh, before I forget, I know there was some discussion in the comments about deep sand beds potentially creating an environment for anaerobic bacteria to grow and producing pockets of deadly hydrogen sulfide gas. I'm not necessarily worried about it with my Shy Guys jungle tank because A, my substrate isn't that deep, like 3 inches at most. And then B, I am regularly stabbing root tabs into my substrate, which messes up the sand a bit. Plus, Jason from Primetime Aquatics, who happens to be a college professor of microbiology, says that he's actually seen hydrogen sulfide bubbles coming from some of the tanks in his fish room, but he's also running a lot of sponge filters, and it's never really bothered his fish. If you want to learn more about my process for setting up a planted tank with sand substrate, check out my series over here and subscribe to join our community. Take time to enjoy your aquariums, and I'll see you in the next video.